Good evening, everyone. We're just letting folks jump in right now. We'll get started in just a minute, so just bear with us. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a minute. We are just letting folks jump on in here from the waiting room. We'll get started as soon as we get a good number of folks in here, so just bear with us for a second. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's cannabis program on What's on Tap, the high point of the beer industry. My name is Josh Prue. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement here at UConn, and welcome to episode 3 of our 1881 series, What's on Tap. Today, we plan to jump into a whole host of new ideas that are popping out of breweries across the country, including exploring cannabis into the world of craft beer. Tonight, our hope is to talk a little bit about what you need to know about CBD, THC, and hemp, and the differences between them, what you should be aware of when approaching beer or beverages that might contain one of these, how breweries in particular, and specifically how one brewery here in Connecticut is trying to make things work. And we also hope to get into a little bit about what the farm brewery here is doing in terms of their growing process, the flavor profiles you might find in their beer, and a little bit about what you can expect coming down the pike in this new world of craft beer. We're thrilled to have two fantastic alums with us today to help us get a better understanding of all these two worlds that are happening. But before we jump in, just a couple housekeeping items that we want to make sure that everybody's aware of before we get started tonight. The first, the chat is open. So as we've learned from these types of beer discussions in the past, this is a great place to connect with other Huskies from around the globe and share what you all are drinking, what your favorite breweries are, where you're off to next in terms of visiting breweries, your experiences with certain types of beer that we might talk about. What you maybe you want to share your untapped handles so you can have some more friends to drink with socially in this pandemic world. So, or even if you want to chat a little bit more about different things that are happening in the beer world, go ahead and drop those in the chat. And to get us started, we want to hear where you guys are all coming in from today. So take a moment, drop that into the chat now. Let us know what you're drinking too. Obviously, we're craft beer fans here, so we want to know a little bit about what y'all are drinking and what you're enjoying. So we want to see that popping up in the chat when you get a second there. So let us know where you're coming in from. All right. Now we're asking you to please also use the Q&A function that is available on your toolbar there. As you'll see, as soon as folks start jumping into the chat, you're going to see a lot of folks, a lot of different things coming down there. So it's going to make it a little easier for us to streamline all the Q&As that come forward and make sure that we can answer those questions for you. Lastly, I'm joined by my colleague from the College of Agriculture, Health, and Natural Resources, our Associate Director of Alumni Relations, Erica Glabaki. She'll be monitoring the chat for us here, and she's available if you have any technical challenges or questions that arise, and a huge thanks for her for spending her evening with us as well. And now jumping right into this, joining us today on our panel is owner and brewer from Stewards of the Land Brewing in Northfield, Connecticut. We have Alex DeFrancesco. Alex is a graduate of our CLAS 2010 and also with a Master of Science in 2012. Alex, before we get started here, I'm sure people are interested in dying to know what you've been up to since leaving UConn. Can you fill us in a little bit?
Yeah, so I went back to the family farm and helping my brothers diversify the farm, continuing that process. Our farm was established back in 1907. And with each generation, we add new things to the farm, whether it's our greenhouse range, 10 acres of that, the farm with the row crops, 120 acres in the fields. And then back in about 2014 or so, with my continued passion of brewing as more so a hobby back then, looking to see if we could bring hops back into Connecticut as a commercial cash crop. And so working with my brothers on that, establishing one of the first hop yards in Connecticut, working with our Connecticut Agricultural Experimental Stations, and forming the Connecticut Hop Growers Association. And then with all of those that I just mentioned, working with the state legislators to then get passed in 2017 the Farm Brewery Bill. Once I was able to do that, tackling my town to adopt the Farm Brewery Bill to then allow us to do our own farm brewery right on the farm. And in the midst of that, we had the hemp bill come through, and my oldest brother and I are like, well, it's another commercial cash crop, why not? And so looking at some of the fields that we had, using it growing for both what we wanted to do with it, possibly using for the beer, but also selling it for people to manufacture with and make oil with, we diversified into hemp production back about 2 years ago. And we actually had the second hemp growing license in Connecticut.
All right. Well, awesome. And thank you for sharing that. Chelsea, I'm going to throw it to you next. So just get ready. Chelsea Yearwood is another rock star joining us today, a graduate of our College of Agriculture, Health and Natural Resources in 2016. Chelsea, same question to you. What have you been doing since graduating?
Wow, it's been an exciting time, and so I was really passionate about the emergence of technology and innovation in the healthcare ecosystem, and I was so grateful to be recruited actually on campus in Gamble by Eli Lilly. So right out of school, I got the experience to be a sales rep at Eli Lilly, and that was such an incredible experience. I was able to learn about the diabetes disease state, learn about product launches in a competitive market, learn about the formulary insurance part of pharmaceuticals, but most importantly, I learned about healthcare and what the providers were dealing with in terms of their pain points. And so overwhelmingly, I was noticing that healthcare providers were seeking a safer alternative to opioids. And that's when they really started leaning on cannabis as a viable treatment option. Fast forward, I moved on to Capsule Pharmacy and I worked as a doctor partnership manager. In this role, I learned a lot about the distribution of drugs in the New York market, learned about which drugs were in high demand. And for those who aren't familiar with Capsule Pharmacy, Capsule is a startup pharmacy that is leveraging technology for better health outcomes. And again, I found the common thread, similar to what I was seeing in Connecticut. Overwhelmingly, healthcare providers are seeking a safer alternative to opioid crisis. And they were also starting to lean towards medical cannabis as a viable treatment option. And so, long story short, at Capsule Pharmacy, two pharmacists left and went to go to a dispensary in New York called Fiorello, actually. And that's when it really planted the seed again in my mind, like, wow, this is so cool, hearing that pharmacists are working in dispensaries in New York State. And so that's when I joined the Vireo Health team, which was an incredible experience. I was able to, launch multiple products to market, form strategic partnerships with 5 multi-state operators in New York State, and really learn what was going on at dispensaries. I think cannabis has such harmful stigma around the plant, and people don't even really realize sometimes, who's working in dispensaries, what their knowledge is, and how patients react to the treatment that they get at dispensaries. And I was able to learn a lot there, grow a lot of distribution. And right now, fast forward, I'm a brand ambassador for Toast Wellness. So Toast Wellness is a full spectrum hemp and a cannabis company. I work as a brand ambassador, and with them, I work to grow multi-channel distribution and brand awareness. So we're going to talk about this today, but it's really fascinating to learn the differences and the similarities between cannabis and hemp and how they're regulated state to state. So I'm so excited to be here with you guys today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that leads us right into the start of the conversation that everybody's kind of itching to know a little bit more about, excuse me. Alex, let's talk a little bit about the farm, the DeFrancesco farm here, and talk a little bit about how y'all got into the hemp process. I know you alluded to a little bit about it. You were the second hemp license to get in there. Talk about where you started the hemp and a little bit about when the brewery kind of came into the picture. So I guess maybe reverse that. The brewery first and then the hemp, because I think it kind of went that way, right?
It did, but it was roughly the same time as well. Even though the brewery was in a long time planning, the brewery first opened a little more than a year ago, back in the start of November 1st, 2019. And our first hemp crop, we started growing in March 2019. So when the hemp legislation passed for the state of Connecticut back in that spring, we were able to get our seeds, start germinating the seedlings and cultivating them in our greenhouses and prep them for growth in the fields. Now for us, we've been growing for over 100 years. So for my brothers and I, it's another plant to grow, very simple going. And we were very conscious of making sure the plants were staying as hemp, not getting hot, and achieving a desirable crop, then that we could then sell as a raw agricultural product, whereas it's the flower itself sold to the public, or selling it to a manufacturer, a hemp manufacturer that wanted to take it and make oil, whether it's CBD oil or make edibles, whatever it might be. And then for us, at the same time, looking at, well, can we use this in the beer at the brewery? And so one of the first beers that we opened with was our Pura Vida that used one of our pineapple strands in. And with that, it was more hand in hand, and just taking was ingrained into us as being farmers, agriculture, taking this crop, translating it, and making another farm product at the farm brewery. And that's how we're able to initially make the beer that had the hemp in it. And later on, I'll get into how we actually went further and did tests for the state of Connecticut, the TTB, which is the Alcohol, Trade and Tobacco Bureau, and the USDA, showing that the hemp beer that we made actually contained no CBD nor THC in it. Yet the hemp product that we grew had certain levels of CBD in it and was underneath the 0.3 THC requirement that is required by the state. So tying that all together, we grew about 2 crops in the field of hemp, 3 different varietals. And then we did another crop inside in our greenhouses. As I mentioned before, we have about 10 acres of greenhouses. We took about an acre, we sandwiched it in between, grew it like an indoor range, like the medical facilities do, maintaining the light. And even with the same varieties, we saw distinct differences in yields and oil, volume, the cones, the flowers, everything. But at that point, up until a couple weeks ago, the Connecticut legislation had a huge roadblock into it for manufacturers. And I think we'll get into that later on.
Yeah, let's hold off on that part. We'll get there in a little bit.
But any which way, we did the first beer product, the Pura Vida, that had the hemp in it. I went gentle at the start, so we did minuscule amounts of the hemp flower, and we had people all over Connecticut coming for it. We had people even from the state building coming for it that loved it, enjoyed it. It's more like an IPL, low ABV, 4%. The second round we did was more of traditional IPA, so a really dank IPA, used 5 times the amount of hemp into it, and a different varietal, our cherry varietal. And that was the one that we actually did all the tests on to show the state, the TTB, and the USDA that our patent pending process uses hemp as a raw agricultural product. However, it does not pull the oils of CBD and THC out of the flower, but provides the aroma and the flavor.
Let's put a pin in that for just a minute. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Talk a little bit about, before even getting into the hemp part of the beer process here, let's talk a little bit about the Stewards of the Land Brewing. Talk to us about, when are you guys open? Obviously, you know, normal type of situation, the pandemic rules, all of those things applied. And what is the beer outside of the hemp thing that we'll get a little bit more into? Yeah. What is it that people want to know about when they come to Stewards of the Land? This is the beer they want.
So Stewards, name says it all in its own. So we're born and raised farmers. We work with the land. We're natural caretakers. And the concept of Stewards was to utilize the ingredients that we grew ourselves, our farmers around us, that you could source by horse and wagon. And to this date, no other brewery in Connecticut uses the percentage of Connecticut ingredients that we do. Every batch of beer we make is roughly 95% to 100% Connecticut ingredients, whether it's the grains, the hops, berries, different fruits, all of that. And with that, our brewing system is only a 3-barrel brewing system. So having those small sizes allows us to control the quality of the beer with these high quality products, the ingredients to make the high quality products. and showcase it in our tap room. We don't distribute, but people could come get growler fills or can fills. And with that, we've had people come all over, enjoying the atmosphere of being on the farm itself, and tying in with the pandemic. Because we're so wide open, people feel safe. And because of all the land that we have, we've taken even extra safety precautions, spaced people out far enough away from each other rather than just the basic 6 feet. And people are able to enjoy the farm, enjoy the variety of beer that we have, because we just don't do IPAs. We have our stouts, we have our lagers, our pilsners. We typically have 8 or 9 beers on, and usually 6 different varieties on at a time. So there's usually something for everyone that comes, as long as they're able to drink a beer. And on top of that, we usually have naturally made sours where we don't use acids to sour them. And people that usually don't drink beer will gravitate to those sours because they taste like a cider or they taste like a wine. And it allows everyone that comes to enjoy it, rather than saying, well, they don't have beer, let's go somewhere else that has wine or cider. So they get that full effect.
Interesting. And so let's come back to the actual beer making process. I am seeing some questions that are coming through in the chat. If folks can do us a quick favor, if you can throw that into the Q&A, because as you can see, it's starting to find its way up to the top because other folks are jumping in. Just want to acknowledge, Chelsea, Alex, I don't know if you've noticed, but in the chat, you've got people in here from San Diego, Cincinnati, Austin, Texas, New York City, Johnson City, Tennessee, which I have a childhood friend, spent every summer with this family from Johnson City, Tennessee. I know well. LA, Manchester, Connecticut, Hoboken, people right in stores. We've got Narragansett, Rhode Island, Guilford, Connecticut, Billerica, Mass, Springfield. We've got Florida in here too. Look at that. Let's see, New Haven, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Wilmette, North Windham, Connecticut. Let's see, more Pennsylvania, another Johnson City, Tennessee. Wow, okay, Wilton, Farmington. All right, people are everywhere. Houston, Texas. Everybody from across the country is chiming in today. So really appreciate everybody participating in that chat there. But yeah, if you have a question, you can throw that into the Q&A one that you've got. That way we don't lose it and we can get back to it, but we will get back to the actual process. Alex, you set the table for us to kind of switch gears a little bit. I know Chelsea alluded to this a little bit at this point, but let's shift gears into the actual cannabis product now. I think it's a good segue, and not to make it pun on words, but I'm a dad, so I do this a lot. Chelsea, you're on the hot seat. So let's throw you to the fire here. Let's find out, and in seriousness, talk some background here. As our resident cannabis expert, what do we need to know about THC, CBD, hemp, and you told me about this one, CBGA. What should we know, and what are the differences that are out there?
Yes, Josh. So first I want to say, Alex, thank you so much for hosting me at Stewards of the Land last week. I had such a blast, and you are so knowledgeable. And I mean, I learned more about beer than I would have ever thought of. So I definitely enjoyed my time there. So thank you for that. Switching gears into cannabis, right? There's so much talk about CBD, THC, full spectrum hemp, and it can be kind of confusing about what's what. And so I just want to first start by saying CBD and THC are super popular, but there are dozens and actually 100 plus cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. And so when we're really thinking about cannabis, I hope that, there's going to start to be a shift when we're thinking about the whole plant experience, right? We're talking about terpenes that are also involved that create, that differentiate, I should say, between strands. And so THC, super popular, right? It's the psychoactive component of the plant. 0.3% is really important when we're talking about THC. That dictates the legality. And Alex, we've spoken a lot about that and how important that number is. And so essentially anything under 0.3% THC for full spectrum hemp is legal. So for example, the products that I'm going to speak about later with Toast, those are full spectrum hemp. They have CBD in it, they have THC in it, they have other cannabinoids in it, but there's less than 0.3% THC, which allows me to sell this product online, as well as, in New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, wherever, which is really great. A big thing about THC is it's super popular in the market. From my experience, the ratio 19:1 THC to CBD has across the board between New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Ohio, it's super popular. So people are really seeking that, honestly, that high effect. But I really want to emphasize that, it's not just about the high THC content. CBD also has a lot of great benefits. And so it's actually really interesting to learn that there's actually an FDA approved drug on the market called Epidiolex, manufactured by GW Pharmaceuticals, which is an FDA approved CBD product, or I should say drug, and it's indicated to treat seizures in individuals with epilepsy. So that's really groundbreaking there. But you can also get CBD over the counter at a dispensary or at certain stores right now. So I think there is some trust that needs to be gained with CBD in the entire market, because how do you really know how good a product is when you're new, when you're a new consumer? And we can talk more about that later, but it is really exciting that there is more knowledge around THC and CBD and other cannabinoids.
Interesting. And you hit the buzzword there. You've mentioned it a couple times now. You mentioned the term cannabinoids. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and some of the benefits that you've alluded to that can come from the activation of those?
Yeah, so cannabinoids are the chemical compound in the cannabis and hemp plant. So CBD, THC, those are two cannabinoids. They're very dominant in the plants, as well as CBGA, which Alex and I have spoken about too. It's kind of like the mother cannabinoid, really, and we're learning more about that. I've seen some CBN soft gels on the market. Sometimes people associate CBN with helping aiding in sleep. But what I really want to emphasize is we're all still learning so much about the cannabis plant. And, so there's more research to come. But for example, in Connecticut, it is a medical cannabis state. And so, for example, chronic pain is the largest qualifying condition. So, providers can write a recommendation for that. Epilepsy, MS, those are also really popular qualifying conditions throughout the nation, as well as PTSD. The list goes on and on and on.
Interesting. All right. Well, that kind of opens the door to the next piece here. You've alluded to this, the differences that are happening within each state. Obviously, this was this past week was a big election cycle. We're going to stay out of the chaos that is the presidential election. We're going to focus just a little bit about the higher points to this. To keep with our play on words here. Talk to us a little bit about what you saw in terms of some of the states passing individual legislations now to support cannabis and what that means for us going forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, really exciting to see across the board where states were allowed to vote on cannabis, it was overwhelmingly a yes. And so, for example, Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, South Dakota all voted yes to recreational or adult use cannabis. So that makes 15 total states in the US that have voted yes and plan to enact adult use cannabis. South Dakota and Mississippi legalized medical cannabis this election term. So that means 36 states, have enacted to vote for medical cannabis. And that's really, really huge. So really exciting to see, and that's going to continue to open up as time goes on.
Interesting. Okay, so we do have a question that kind of pertains to some of this that's come through from the audience, and hopefully one of you will be able to answer this. I have no knowledge of this, so I'm kind of playing in the sandbox for the first time. I've never heard the term that's being used here: black market cannabis versus obviously what you're referring to, Chelsea. What is the average THC rate that somebody would find from black market cannabis? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term.
Right. So typically I would say the illicit market or the legacy market or just the market that's not in a dispensary. To be honest with you, I don't know, because how do we know? I don't know if it's being tested. I don't know if that's common knowledge. I'm not quite sure. But what can I can speak on what's going on in dispensaries, and for example, back to the 19-to-1 THC to CBD, that's extremely popular. People tend to like higher THC products. I should say some people tend to like higher THC products, but to be honest with you, I can't really speak on what's going on in the illicit market because I don't see their lab results.
I wonder if there are lab results for that matter, right?
Right, which is the point, right? Which is the point, yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So, you talked about the mother of the cannabinoids, and you've mentioned this a couple times in our prep calls as well. What is the endocannabinoid system, and why should we care about it?
Ooh, So the endocannabinoid system is very exciting. Just a very high level response to that is a system in our body that maintains homeostasis. So we're really trying to get that balance. And the really cool thing about the endocannabinoid system is that pets have it too. And so, you know, I have some samples here, but for example, this Toast Meow product, so it's for cats. It was formulated with a veterinarian. Cats go crazy over it, and I never even thought about pet products, honestly, when I was, in other parts of cannabis because, I never sold any. But it's really cool to learn that not just humans benefit from this, but also pets. So we have dog products, we have cat products, but really endocannabinoid system is about maintaining balance in our bodies. Very important.
All right. Well, and that kind of leads into the next aspect. We talk a little bit about the homeostasis and maintaining balance. And you've mentioned this a number of times in terms of health benefits. Are there health benefits to products that we can find on the market, like say through Toast Wellness or various other products that are out there containing CBD or THC? Alex, Chelsea, are there things that you guys are aware of? And I want to make sure that we keep it open for Alex to jump in too. So I'll turn it to you both. And are there health benefits we should be aware of?
Chelsea, I'll let you tackle that one first before I jump into the seltzers and beer that I've seen out there with the CBD in it.
Okay. So, Josh, my answer to that is absolutely yes. We see that there is medical cannabis, right? So I would like to think that we've been seeing enough research that there is a lot of health benefits, right? Chronic pain is the largest qualifying condition across the US, which is huge. Just a few months ago, cannabis allowed chronic pain as a qualifying condition. And that means so much for our state, especially when we're talking about the opioid crisis, right? But I want to take a step back and have the conversation about, it's not just about, smoking, of course, it's not just about, edibles, but it's also, these products can be used topically, not this pet one. I wouldn't put the meow on my face, but these toast oils, they can also be used as skincare products as well. So there are just so many different ways that we can use cannabis and hemp. And it's really exciting to see. So absolutely, yes, there are health benefits. And everyone can look on their state website to see what their state qualifies if they live in a state with medical cannabis, but what their state recognizes for health benefits.
Alex, before you jump in with the seltzer piece, because we'll get to that in just a second, but I guess when we get into the whole beer conversation and where this falls into, but I think what's important here, based on what you're talking about, Chelsea, is, when people are going out there and purchasing products, we talked about this a little bit in the prep world. You've explained it this way. The Yukon Cannabis Program has also explained it this way, and the terminology seems to be consistent. It's the Wild West. Why is that the case, and what is it that we as consumers, if we want to go out there and start dabbling in, say, CBD, which has a legal component here in Connecticut that most consumers can go out and find, what is it that we should be looking for, and what are the key buzzwords and demarcations that we should be looking for that are on the packaging?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one, you always want to trust the source, right? So where are you getting these products from? So personally, I love going to dispensaries because I can have a conversation. In Connecticut, there are pharmacists in the dispensaries, right? So I can really have a dialogue about, what is this product going to do to me? What medications may I be on? How will that interact? So I think that's a big key point to that, but also understanding dosage, right? And learning that when you smoke, right, and when you inhale, you will receive the effects faster than if you had an edible. And understanding, what your dosage is. And I think what everyone should try to live by is start low and go slow, right? So they make sure that they're not overwhelming themselves with the experience and really figure out what that perfect balance is. And, just another example, toast oils are USDA certified organic, which is huge, right? We want to make sure that what we're putting in our bodies is the most pure and best quality. And so you can have confidence knowing that, there's that stamp of approval there as well.
Interesting. So Alex, I mean, that takes me to the next question that can go your way. As a farm, obviously, you've mentioned that we'll get into the regulations tied to the beer aspect, but you obviously have the hemp flower that you can provide as a product to your consumers. Right. How do you go about providing that, and what can your consumers see on the packaging?
So, one of the samples I gave Chelsea when she came down to the brewery last week was actually one of our hemp jars. And on the packaging, it's dictated by the hemp legislation right now. The the one previous and current, you need to have your hemp license on it, the amount of grams of the hemp flower that you're selling, or whatever it might be. So whether it's the hemp flower, seed, whatever it might be, that has to be clearly put on it. The classic, it's under 0.3% THC on it. The batch number on it. So essentially a laundry list of, if heaven forbid you get stopped by an officer, and that's your get out of jail free card. Because and we've talked about this in previous meetings, how we had our local PD come down during growing the batches outside, and this happened all throughout Connecticut. Is the officers can't tell the difference between a hemp plant and one that's growing for medical purposes that's high THC. And our officers are like, the only way we can tell the difference if we take it back to the labs to test it. So it's great that CBD can be purchased by anyone, especially like the raw hemp flower. The caveat to it is the state dictates it can be sold as a raw agricultural product. You just can't suggest a use for it. And everyone, like, we mostly will sell it at our farm stand or at the brewery. And at the brewery, of course, you have people, they see the samples on the bar, they're looking at it, and they're like, is that what I think it is? It's like, no, it's hemp, it's illegal. And it gets into that whole conversation and educating this is what we have, this is what we do, and the 3 varietals that we're doing. And we have 3 that range on the different levels of CBD. And with that, people will actually smell it, like they'll smell their beer, because with hops, they have different aromas and flavor. Same with the hemp and the cannabis, they have different aromas and flavor. So we've had people that are like, oh, this one works better for me, or I like the flavor better on this, I like the aroma better on this. And we'll have people just come back to buy the flower. And whatever they do with it afterwards, that's on them.
But that's still legal on both ends, you as the proprietor and them as the consumer. So okay,
correct.
It makes some sense. So let's transition a little bit. People here obviously are beer lovers. They want to know a little bit about how beer comes into the mix of this. Obviously, we've touted this as the next thing happening in beer. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Alex, can you set the stage for us? Where do breweries come in on this? And because I know we've discussed obviously, the legislative pieces, but set the table for us. What is out there now for the market in terms of beer and cannabis, and what do we need to know? Where can we find it?
So I'll start with beer. Beer, we've seen a lot of one-offs in Colorado, and the northern states, even ours, where breweries have used whether hemp or flower, CBD flower, or THC flower, and usually more or less the state will come down and be like, no, you can't do it for this reason, or the TTB would be like, no, we need further tests. Even if the other levels have said, yes, go for it. And with that, with beer, because it's alcohol, the biggest fear right now from the states that we've seen, and we've talked with some of our friends at Alchemist, and it's funny because a couple of months ago, I saw that they're taking a picture of their one of their new IPAs in a hemp field. I'm like, oh, you guys tried it again? They're like, no, this is one of our friends that has a hemp field. We're just taking a picture. And whether it's the state or the TTB or the USDA, they'll either kick it to the next level so you can get approval, or the highest level will say, no, we need further research. And the biggest fear right now is because of alcohol and hemp, whether it has CBD, THC, the other cannabinoids in it. Even if you could present tests, and we presented tests that one of the state labs did that had showed there was no THC and no CBD in the beer products, but because the USDA still isn't comfortable, they're like, well, you need further research. Even though we provide them with the research from the state labs, they're like, well, because of COVID's happening right now, we'll get back to you. And there's a lot of potential for beer that can be had there, especially when it's used in our patent pending process. Now, if the other drinks like seltzers that like we're mentioning before, all the seltzers you're seeing out on the market right now are non-alcoholic seltzers. And I think there's over 5 different breweries in the state that are making seltzers that contain CBD in it, which the state and TDB have no issue with because that's just CBD. There's no alcohol in it. I believe there's one up north, Long Trail, that has CBD in it, and they tried doing CBD and alcohol, and then they had the same issue, and they just went back to CBD. And be same with any other alcoholic drink as well. The sparkling waters that I were mentioning before, there's a lot of them out there. I see a lot coming out of New York. We even sell some at our farm stand, and they're all different levels, milligrams of CBD, and people enjoy it. All different flavors, whether they're drinking it to enjoy it or drinking it because of the dosage of the milligrams. As Chelsea was mentioning, the health benefits, I think you will see down the road that they'll finally allow us to do alcohol with CBD together, but it's because of that unknown fear that they're still hesitant on. I think most of that's still coming from the insurance companies and the backers on the unknown, on how it will impact each individual, especially if they're consuming it on site at a brewery or at a bar. The funny thing with Connecticut is, though, you could still order a drink and you can order a drop of CBD or like honey sticks that have CBD in them, and the consumer can mix them at their table. But the bar can't just mix it for them and then give it to them. So
interesting.
It's interesting, all those different aspects that we're seeing, whether it's beer, non-alcoholic seltzer that has CBD in it, and all the different aspects we've seen before.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about your own process, but we haven't exactly talked about what that looks like. Can you talk about, I believe you said it was your Pura Vida, right? Is that the name of the beer that you mentioned?
Yeah, so the first one was the Pura Vida. And
so let's talk about what you did.
Essentially, I'll use the state of Connecticut. State of Connecticut requires, if you do any chemical alteration to hemp, or if you do physical alteration to hemp, then it's considered manufacturing. So you need a hemp manufacturing license. For us, because we grow it and then utilize it ourselves and maintain it as a farm product, because all the beer that we make can only be a farm product for our brewery. We took it and we did it in the brewing process. So it wasn't in the boil process. Wasn't in the whirlpool.
This is the hemp that you're talking about, right?
This is the hemp beer, yeah. So we added the whole flower, and essentially in a dry hopping aspect, into the wort before it was turned into beer. Now that terminology is, some people might recognize. For beer, when you're making beer, you essentially on brew day make wort, and that's taking the sugars from the grains, your mash, pulling all those into a liquid, doing the boiling process, adding your various hops, ingredients, whatever they might be, crashing that so that way it gets to the appropriate temperature where you can pitch the yeast. And once the yeast starts working and making alcohol, that's when it starts becoming beer. Because we would add it into the process in between the boiling process and between the yeast making alcohol, the alcohol from the beer would not degrade and break down the flour. So it wasn't stripping the CBD or the THC that's in the flour, but you're still getting the same effects as if you're adding hops to it in the aromatics and the flavor aspect. And I'm not going to delve too much more into it because it's still a patent pending process, but it's one of those where it's that the in-between stages and certain equipment that we use to infuse it that allows it to just take the natural raw product itself and pass all the wort through it. And as it's just passing through it, it picks it up.
Essentially, it sounds like you're creating a cold brew coffee, but with hemp and beer.
Very similar, yes.
Like steeping,
Yes, more or
basically, where
less.
you're kind of sitting there. So to sum up what you're saying, what it sounds like you're doing, obviously based on the regulations, there needs to be a chemical change of some sort, and usually that occurs
Yep.
through a heat process, right? But because you're not using a heat process, essentially it's staying the same.
A heat or chemical, and then the chemical
Okay.
aspect would be if you took right now beer that was almost done fermenting and had some alcohol into it, or say like an IPA that was 7%, if you threw flour into it like a dry hop, the alcohol would pull the CBDs out. Because one of the things with hemp manufacturing is when you go to take hemp flower to extract the CBD to make CBD oil, one of the ways you could extract the CBD is using alcohol to pull that out, and then you process that in further distillation machinery. Um, and that's the thing. So because we did it in between all those stages, and similar to a cold brew steep, where they're not actually steeping the flour in the beer, and that was the catch that, and why the Connecticut DCP passed us from, they didn't want to know anything about it, to the TTB. And then when we talked to the TTB on it, they're like, technically you're right, but you have to go to the USDA, and you get approval from the USDA, then we're okay with it. And Connecticut said if the TTB approves it, then we'll approve it. And the USDA is like, well, we're not going to review anything right now, even though you have the results from all the tests. We're working with COVID right now. We'll get back to you. And I've been almost every month reaching out to them, seeing like, hey, can we do this? Is there anything else that you need? And that's the catch that we're just waiting on right now.
Interesting. So how many batches did you get through before you had to kind of shift gears and go in a different direction?
We did 2 different batches. The initial was the Pura Vida, and that one sold out in about 2 weeks or so, all on site. And then the next one was the Jeremiah's IPA, and that one we only did a partial before we started talking with the state of Connecticut, TTB, and USDA. And originally, state of Connecticut approved us on doing all of this, and then they took a second look afterwards after everyone was enjoying it. They're like, well, we're not sure. And because farm breweries are so unique, because everything we make is a farm product, they're like, we'll just pass this on to the feds.
Let's tackle that next piece, because you kind of tied it back into the farm brewery aspect. And obviously, as a farm brewery, you pride yourself on bringing your products into your brewing process. So talk to us a little bit about, obviously you grow your own hemp product on site. What are some of the things, you mentioned this earlier, where you sometimes have inspections that happen, you have police that happen. I know you're not currently growing anything right now, but what are some of the processes that you have to undertake to make sure you're doing it legal, so that you don't end up with that hot plant that you mentioned earlier, where then it basically becomes a different product?
Correct. So as I mentioned towards the start of the talk, my family and I have been farmers our entire lives, and all different commercial crops growing. We understand the limits to each plant, the stresses, especially weather stress, water stress, all of that aspects. And for hemp, even if you're growing CBD varieties for medical purposes, if you stress hemp out, it has the potential to go hot, whether it's heat stress, it's not getting the proper nutrition, water stress, all of those. And back last year, I want to say a third of the farms saw that, and they're growing varieties that were deemed normally would be under the 0.3% for THC content. But because of all the weather stresses, or people that weren't farmers that got hemp growing license, trying to grow them and didn't know how to properly take care of them, their crops went hot. And in accordance for state of Connecticut, if you have a crop that goes hot, you usually do a test about 15 days before harvest. And then the test will go out to the state. And then depending how big your field is, you do either a random assortment throughout the acres, or if it's a small crop, you usually do a sample from each plant. And if it comes back hot, there's a few ways you could destroy it. An agent from the state will come out, watch you destroy it. And typically, like, burning's number one, or throwing it through a wood chipper is another one because people can't use it afterwards. And so we saw that in a lot of crops throughout the state last year. We also saw farmers buying seeds from sources or buying seedlings from sources that were said to be hemp or low THC varieties, growing them. It turned out that it actually was the full plant itself and not just hemp, and having very high contents of THC. So those had to be destroyed. And the other aspects that we saw were farmers that were growing, and people growing for the black market were growing in nearby woods. And so their crops were then lacing the hemp crops, causing the hemp crop to get hot. And then actually some of the local PD then used that to figure out where people were growing their plants in the woods.
Essentially, your plants were being germinated and pollinated by nearby plants to make them go hot, essentially.
Some farmers, yeah, could be, and it's because of wind pollination is how they're pollinated. And if you ever watch the documentary, The Green Triangle, that focuses on all the hemp products, hemp growers in California, there are some farmers that get so cutthroat that they'll take a male plant that is loaded with pollen, go on top of the hill of one of their fellow farmers, shake all the pollen out to pollinate all the females. And because if they get pollinated, they'll germinate the seeds, focus on seed production and not the oil production. So it makes an inferior product.
So a question came in that we can expand a little bit about. We've used the term hot plant. Can either one of you talk a little bit more about what that means and why people should be concerned with that terminology?
Chelsea, you want to tackle that one?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so when Alex says the plant is hot, he's saying that the plant has higher than 0.3% THC in it. So that means that it's not technically hemp anymore. It is considered cannabis, right? At that point, Alex?
Correct.
It's fascinating.
Interesting.
And because there's so many, there's some varieties, and we grew one that was borderline, that has a high likelihood if you don't take care of it properly, it'll become hot like that. And yet at the same time, it produces very high contents of CBD. So if you know what you're doing, you can produce a quality crop with high CBD.
Which has definitely more use legality-wise. You can use it a lot. Got it. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Alex is saying drop it like it's hot in his...
Oh, there we go again. Here we go. You're making... Clearly, we had a lot of conversations with play on words when we were prepping these things. And I've got a few more. Alex knows one's coming a little bit later that I've been thinking about here that I'm leading into a question that I want to ask. So, but what I want to talk about, Alex, you mentioned this quickly. Obviously, you've grown a couple different strains here and a couple different varieties of plants. What do you currently grow at Stewards? I mean, obviously now you mentioned, given the hold up due to the pandemic, you and your partners decided to hold off this year on growing hemp because it obviously has to be utilized within a certain timeline. So what normally would you find in your fields?
So we did 3 varieties. We did Purple Magic, Pineapple, and Cherry. And the Pineapple is one of those Oregon strands that I was mentioning that could become hot really quick, but produces a high CBD content. And between the 2 crops we raised of that one, we're getting about 20% CBD content, which is pretty high for regular hemp, especially when it's under the 0.3% for THC. And then that was a crop that we used in the Pura Vida. So
for somebody who, you're saying these names and I'm like, okay, so clearly it either smells or tastes like pineapple and cherry. Is that how that works? Or is it just randomness that comes up with these names? Because you said Purple Haze was the other one. So, I mean, either that or somebody's a Prince fan. I don't really know.
More or less, what I've seen is the names usually will give a hint to how the flavor is or the aromatics are. There's a lot out there, similar with hops, that they have code names where it's numbers and letters and it's something new in the market. And that's the fun aspect with hemp is how you see the same thing with hops. Is there's over hundreds and hundreds of varieties you could grow. And if you look at the approved list that Canada has I say the list that Canada has because a lot of the states will say, hey, if Canada has it, it's approved to use in Connecticut, to grow in Connecticut. I think there's over 200 varieties on that list. And the pineapple one is, like I was mentioning, that the Oregon strand has a lot of citrus notes, smells like pineapple. That's a customer favorite that we have for people that just buy the raw flower. The Purple Magic is just a dank, funky one that people enjoy as well. It's in the medium range for the CBD content. It's about 15 or so. The cherry actually holds true to its name with cherry notes on it, some dark fruit notes, and it's more of a lower CBD content, but it's one of the easier plants to grow, and it's not as likely to become hot. So it's one of those, we had to do grow variety to see what does well in Connecticut, and also to have a cautious one, so that way if one or two became hot, that at least we had one crop that then could be sent to the manufacturers and wasn't complete waste.
Sure. So let's keep in mind with the farming aspect of this product, because obviously you're trying to cultivate not only a product in your tap room, but also a product in the fields as well, and kind of balance the two different sides of the industry. You mentioned this in some of our prep discussions, the term terroir. Now, for me, as a French major at UConn, I know that means terrain, it means earth. I've only ever heard that being utilized in the winemaking aspect. So talk to me about how this plays into the aspect when it comes into cannabis production.
So terroir hits big when, like how you mentioned, goes into like the vineyards, the grapes. The same aspect is true with hops and hemp. Hops, we've been seeing a huge research on, especially in New England, with all the universities looking at how the same varieties, I'll use Cascade, because Cascade is a well-known hop plant that most beer drinkers would know about. And that was the big variety that made the craft beer movement in the 90s. Cascade grown in the Pacific Northwest compared to one of the states in New England and compared to Europe, same variety genetically, but looking at phenotypically, or the physical traits that will show, will produce different oil contents because of just the mother nature variables around it. So sunlight cues, temperature, water, nutrients, angle of the sun, all stuff like that will then play into a role of the oil content that's then developed from season to season, even on the same farm, in the same area. So that's why, like, when people say, hey, the vintage of this year was really good, is because all those variables came together for that given area. Same could be applied to hops and then hemp as well. So the hemp characteristics that we saw, like with the pineapple, we typically wouldn't see the CBD oil contents up to like 19-20%, as I mentioned before. Is advertised as 15 to 17. It might get a little higher, but because of how the weather was and how we were growing it, we got higher CBD levels and still keeping the THC pretty low. We've seen that immensely in hops, especially like Cascade, Nugget, a lot of the old-fashioned varieties. And I'll say it for our farm brewery, we've been using these varieties in substitution of Citra, Simcoe, Mosaic, because they're showing oils that are being produced that give the same flavors and aromas as Citra, Mosaic, and Simcoe.
Interesting.
And that's for us as a brewery, if we could use a crop that's local and it costs half the amount that it would for us to bring Citra in from the Pacific Northwest, it's a no-brainer. And still make a beer that is just as high quality as someone using Citra, or some of these other territory varieties that you can't even grow in our area. And because of how closely related hops and hemp are, you're seeing a lot of those terroir aspects being taken upon. And in going another step further, UVM has been looking, because of the genetic similarities of hops and hemp, they're trying to cross varieties so you have a hop hemp plant.
Hold that thought. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there, and so
I
hold
jumped the
that
gun on
thought real
that one.
quick. You're jumping the yeah, absolutely, no worries. But so I'm gonna actually ask the question because you kind of alluded to it with the Citra, and obviously being one of the more popular hops that are out there, Citra Mosaic seems to be that one that's always finding its way into a New England IPA of some sort that people are always looking for. So I'm gonna ask the question: is this the next craze? Are we gonna now start seeing the cannabis and beer infusion? Is that the next Hazy New England IPA wave craze that we're going to start seeing through the beer world, or is this still 5 or 10 years, or even a couple, even beyond? When is this all coming to play?
I think it goes back to how craft beer is craft beer, and we've seen like the New England IPA come about, a focus on sours, a focus on imperial stouts, especially like high alcohol imperial stouts that have 10, 14 different ingredients in them. We have a local one in Connecticut. They make phenomenal beer. But then it goes back to the sense of what is craft beer and what can you use with ingredients presented to you. I think if the USDA gives a green light, then yes, it's going to be a no-brainer because you could use the hemp flower just as you use hops. So there's really no new applications they have to learn. It's not like, well, how can I add marshmallows in here, or how can I take vanilla extract or get roasted cacao and infuse it properly, so it doesn't taste like hot cocoa, but it's actually a beer. I think it's something that's going to be versatile for any brewer to get their hand on. It's just how is each state going to allow them to do so when it comes to the alcohol and the hemp together.
Interesting.
I would like to see it in the next year or two. I think definitely like how Chelsea was mentioning, with a lot of people going for medical and recreational use, and a lot of changes in all these states, and with the new Farm Ag bill that went back last year, and a lot of the states aligning with it, we'll probably see it sooner than later. But with any beer, any alcohol, about 2015, 2016, the TTB came out with a laundry list about 7 pages long of pre-approved ingredients. So I think where we're coming from is just the start to get hemp flower, specifically hemp flower, and the method that we do it as a pre-approved process that then any breweries could use. And usually goes if it's a raw agricultural product, they're comfortable with breweries using it.
All right. So that's a good segue to get us in. Oh, Chelsea's got a comment. Go ahead.
Yes. I do also want to give another plug for beverages. I think it's really cool what Alex is doing, particularly because trends that we're seeing due to COVID are showing that beverages, edibles, and other forms of consumption outside of, conventional smoking maybe or inhalation are becoming more and more popular. So I really think Alex is on to something big here.
And that's the perfect segue, because we were going to get a little bit more into, we mentioned this, and Chelsea, I'll turn to you for this one. We've talked about a term, and it's come up a couple times in the conversation tonight, around terpenes and what that is and why people should be aware of a terminology. So first, can you talk to us about what terpenes are, and then we'll kind of shift a little bit into the beer flavor profile aspect.
Right. So terpenes are awesome. So terpenes are essential oils that provide aroma and flavor to the cannabis plant, but terpenes are found in multiple different ways. You can get terpenes from fruits, so citrus fruits. I personally like linalool. Alex, what's your favorite terpene?
Terpene. I actually don't have a favorite. I just enjoy more of a mellow, low-key experience. Like with anything that I partake in, I like to be in control. So like the newness aspects of some of these, I dabble in and I take a little in. I did get that set from you, so I'm excited to try those oils, and possibly experience them where we could just do droplets in each of the beers too.
Ooh. So what
See if
Alex
there's
about the toast oils. He's talking
Yes.
about infusing his beer with full spectrum hemp. That's pretty cool.
So let's shift the gear real quickly to that. I mean, both of you mentioned this to me when we kind of caught up the other day. What are you guys exploring between Toast and Steward of the Land? I mean, you kind of just alluded to it a little bit there, but do you want to talk a little bit about your exploratory process as a result of a UConn alumni connection that we made, putting you guys on this panel? I mean, it was magic waiting to happen, clearly. But
Ooh, well, I'll let Alex take the lead on that one.
Okay. So Chelsea and I were brainstorming when she came a couple weeks back, and as everyone knows, when you go to a brewery, you could get a flight, and that allows you to sample the beers that they can offer. And especially it's like ones that you normally won't get a full pour, but you want to experience it. Well, I alluded to it previously, how the state allows the consumer, if you have your beverage at your table and say you get a honey stick or a dropper or whatnot, the consumer can then mix that at the table. So why couldn't we do a sampling of and a pairing of, hey, these are the beers that we think would go well with these oils. Have fun. and do it as a fun experiment with that. Now it'd be interesting to see which oils pair well with different styles of beer that we have. And obviously, if you just said, hey, this oil is going to go with an IPA, there's so many IPAs out there, and the way you could brew them, and especially the aromatics, especially the natural dankness from the hops in the IPAs, would that pair well with this oil or another one? Same with a Pilsner, a Stout, and so on and so on. So I think that has potential for a very fun partnership down the road.
interesting. So you heard it here, folks. I mean, they're just exploring, but you never know what's going to come from this, right? So, but you mentioned, again, you led me perfectly into this, Alex. You talked about it. You said the key word. You said the word dank. So let's jump into the world of the dank IPA, the dank beer. You know, when you're talking about descriptors, oftentimes, you know, when you're describing a beer to somebody, there's a lot of different flavor profiles that you can come up with. Some would say certain IPAs might be soft, they might be pillowy, they might have a little bit of lactose to them and like a creaminess to them. Well, one word that is synonymous both with beer and with cannabis is the term dank. And the other one that comes from that is resinous, right? Where it has that oily kind of almost a little bit of metallic to it. So what I want to do is I want to see if folks out there know this term, number one, and if they've tried some beers, to let us know what those might be. Because, you know, if we can run to the local Packy tomorrow, yes, I said the word Packy. I'm a Massachusetts native. That's how this works. I go to the Packy to get my beer, and I go to Harvard to go drink it down there. Yes, I know how it works. So if you have tried some dank beers, we'd like to know what those are, because obviously we want to talk a little bit about the experience that comes from that. So my question is, if hops are a green resinous flower, and so is cannabis, are they related, or am I just listening to way too much Dre and Snoop Dogg these days?
Oh.
Really? So
I'm a 90s kid. What do you want from me?
That's all good. But it's funny how, Josh, you and I were talking about this before, is how closely related hops and hemp and the cannabis plant are. And how I alluded to, like, UVM has taken that and trying to do a breeding program between the two flowers. The way the oils are constructed and stored in the flowers is so similar. So a lot of people, I'll do a lot of events for the Connecticut Hop Growers Association and bring like raw flower. And up until the hemp bill being passed, when people saw the raw hop flower dried, they look and be like, wait, is that hemp? Is that cannabis? And so how those oils are stored, and it goes back into the terroir as well. There's, for hops, if you look at the oil spectrum analysis, is a star diagram, and depending on which oils are stored and to different degrees will produce different flavors, aromas that could then get passed into the beer. And same like with the hemp, when you smoke it or make edibles with it. And with hops, there's some varieties that are so dank And it's one of those, like how we were saying before, the beer I'm drinking right now is our Cashmere Condor. And the cashmere that's grown in New England has that dankness about it. And like when my brewer and I were brewing this batch of beer a couple weeks ago, we opened up the bag of hops and the aroma just emanated out of the bag, and it smelled like someone had a bowl in the room. That's how pungent the smell was. And it's funny with hops because sometimes that will get translated from the boil process to the fermentation process and dry hopping process to the final product. Other times it might not. It might lose and degrade in all of those steps. But with this one, it traveled through, and we added it during the boil process, the fermentation process, and dry hopping process. And that beer, particularly, if someone's drinking it in our tap room, or if they're drinking outside and I go around and I check on, see how everyone's doing, that beer I could smell right away. And like even like when I go around during COVID with our mask on and everything, I could still smell the pungentness in the area and stuff like that. And that's ridiculous that a hop has that capability. But hemp's the same way too. So there's a couple of breweries that really stick out in my mind, like Relic. They've been around for many years. Mark, the owner, brewmaster, is an amazing guy. I've learned a lot from him. And he makes some IPAs that are dank. And that descriptive is, and like you'll see, like when you look on our menus too, we'll give like a couple of descriptives so that that way people know it's like, hey, what's this Pilsner, this IPA, and all of those. And when you see a beer, when a brewer describes it dank, it's going to have that resiny, that experience of when you get your glass, cup it, inhale it, and you get that full experience. Now this one presents a lot of tropical notes, citrus notes, orange creamsicle notes, and each of these dank varieties of hops could give different aspects too. Some will do like cherries and dark fruit, and it's one of those that it's crazy that when we first brewed this one, we almost thought when people were serving it, some people were like, okay, who's smoking right now? That's how distinguished this aroma is.
Well, let's find out, Chelsea. I mean, we talked about this. Talk to us about, as our science cannabis expert here, obviously when we were digging into this a little bit, we found out that there's a reason for this, and it's called the Cannabis family. You want to talk a little bit about what that is and why there's such an overlap?
So to be honest with you, I think Alex here is the expert on that. I'm new to learning how cannabis hemp is related to beer, to be quite frank with you. So, and I will say that I'm a learning in the cannabis space. I will never say that I'm an expert, but I know more than most, I'll say. So
Alex, then do you want to jump in and talk about how they're interrelated because of the family that we found in the ecosystem?
How hops and hemps are?
Yep. I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but obviously, if you want to just go into that specific there.
Yes. So when you look at the genetics, hops in the cannabis family are the most closely related plants to each other, and it's funny being a hop grower first before a hemp grower, and some varieties of hops when you see them in the fields and the cones are being constructed and the oils are coming, some of them could get as sticky as the hemp flower could get. And the first year we grew hemp, they just looked like magical Christmas trees with the oil oozing because of how sticky the oils are. And the way the two plants,
are we talking Snoop Dogg, Sticky Icky? What are we talking about? See, I can go back there. I mean, so you're talking about sticky, you're talking about the oil. So do they stick together literally? Is that how this kind of happens?
No, so I had the fun experience of being the one that had to harvest all the hemp plants that first crop. And I'm pretty sure I had to change my clothes 5 different times because of how sticky I became.
Because of the oils or because of the flower itself? How does that, I mean, I'm trying to envision.
Because of the oil that was oozing out of the flower.
Okay.
And right before harvest, you'll get to that point, and that's how you know it's ready. Almost like in the morning sunlight, it's glistening. And you'll see the flowers chunk up. And the comparative analysis to the hemp and the hops is the hop cones are the same way. They might look ready, but the oils are still developing. And until you go over and you crack them open, or some varieties, you'll actually start seeing some oils come. And it's amazing how the two of them exhibit the same aspect. Just hemp in the more extreme because of the liquid oil oozing. Hops is just a lupulin. It's more of a powder, so to speak. And how the two plants store their oil content, looking at that has brought some universities to look at, particularly UVM, and their hop experimentation program, to see if they could cross the two plants together, whether it's hops being grown with hemp genetics or hemp with hop genetics. And being the hop program, they're trying to do more hops with the hemp genetics into them to produce more of those aromatics, the flavors, that dankness, to these new varieties. And a little fun tangent with hops is, because you have males and females, and same with cannabis, you have males and females, and they're both can be wind pollinated, but also too, if you cross them, usually nine out of 10 times you get an offspring that's not desirable. For at least the hop aspects, it's doesn't have a flavor, it doesn't have an aroma that you want, but you might get a parent that is strong for a farmer to grow and to cultivate, whether it's resistant to disease, pests, and everything like that. And typically in these breeding programs, they want to cross at least one strong parent with something that's desirable. In this case, we're seeing it's going to be hemp to get those flavors and aromatics. I know they started on this the past couple of years. The head researcher I'm actually going to contact with for our winter program for the Connecticut Hop Growers Association to see where they've come with that. Any success with offspring so far, but it's one of those that would be amazing to see, because then that would just circumnavigate the whole, can you use hemp and beer? If you had an offspring that, well, technically, genetically, it's a hop plant, but has these genetics in it.
It's a workaround.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So.
All right. Well, folks, we have about 17 minutes left to our program tonight. So now if you have any questions that have kind of been percolating throughout, if there's anything specific about the beer process, Stewards of the Land, toast, or the combination of the two products together of cannabis and beer, now is a good time to throw those into the question side. We do see a couple that have been in there at this point. So before we get to those, Alex, let me, Chelsea, let me say what we have coming up next. So Alex, you mentioned a few things here. What are you waiting on now specifically? And when, I mean, we talked a little bit about you're hoping within the next year. Are you looking at exploring workarounds outside of, say, what might be coming out of UVM? Are there ways that you're trying to still recreate Pura Vida without necessarily going with the actual hemp product? What are you all exploring outside of, say, that aspect?
Yeah, so I'll touch base with the Pura Vida one first. So I think even if the USDA doesn't give approval in the next year or two, there are a lot of hops that we could use that are grown locally that could simulate that flavor and that aroma. Similar to like how we did New England grown Cascade as a substitute for Citra.
Okay.
So the whole aspect of craft beer is, can you use various ingredients, just like with cooking, to do as a substitute to get the same effect? So that's definitely an exploration that's a lot easier to do. And I think we can easily replicate the Pura Vida. The Jeremiah, probably not as much, but also to the possible collaboration with Chelsea and I to do those samplings, I think is a very plausible one as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So Chelsea, on the flip side, where's the cannabis industry going from this point forward?
Wow, what a question. And so what I'll say is I'm really excited to see what we saw in the elections in terms of states, opening their doors and allowing medical cannabis, allowing adult use. particularly for the Northeast. I think we're going to see a huge flip. So seeing Jersey open their doors to adult use, and building out a program around that, I feel like we're going to see changes in Connecticut as well as New York, which is really exciting. I think we're also going to see an emphasis on prison reform, right? So as Alex and I are talking about hot plants and 0.3%, it's just really fascinating to learn that right now in Massachusetts, it's adult use, it's medical, and it's a home growth state. So one person can grow up to 6 plants in Massachusetts. In Connecticut, that's not the case at all, right? So we're going to continue to see changes state to state. And cannabis is medicine, but cannabis is also culture. So, Josh, as you're saying, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, right? They've all been a part of the cannabis market for so long, but not the legal market. So, seeing people come out with big brands, it's really exciting. So let's see what happens.
Awesome. Well, we did get a couple questions that come in, and Chelsea, I'm not sure where this fits, but obviously this question actually now that I'm reading it, I'm sorry, might actually be more suited. There's two different aspects here. Assuming THC legalization in Connecticut, what are the options for marketing and selling products in other approved states? And I think specifically they're looking at stewards of the land. You don't sell outside of your brewery. We didn't talk about that. So you don't necessarily distribute, Alex, right? You're only a to go from your own facility, and it's growlers and howlers, right? That type of deal.
Correct. So right now it's only on site and then to go options from our site. We're looking to explore possible canning options that we could do to like local places, and same kegs for restaurants. But right now we're just trying to keep up with the demand for on site. And for people to enjoy if they want to take it home as well.
Okay, and I think I might be just misinterpreting this, but I think the question's asking, are you able to brew something in Connecticut that can be distributed elsewhere if it's legal elsewhere?
So to my knowledge, at least what Connecticut allows is for CBD products, it has to be manufactured in the state. So like that's why originally like Long Trail's seltzer was coming in at the start of them making it, their CBD seltzer, and then they had to stop. So that's why you see, I think there's like over 5 breweries that are making CBD seltzers right now, because that's the one catch right now that Connecticut's still doing. I think when more and more states become along the federal lines and all the same, that will go away. But right now they're just trying to keep the business within the state.
Got it. So this next question goes into your the aroma conversation that we had, and it's, could the dank aroma that you described be mistaken for skunky beer or perhaps beer that has been over oxidized?
So the dankiness that we're describing is actually characteristic of a hop that you could actually have in a beer as well. So the oxidization, and that's a good question, because the oxidization, you more get a metallic aspect from it, whereas the dankiness is more of a herbal and has all the aromas and flavors that like a really good IPA will provide. Especially if you took like a fresh bag of hops, cracked it open like those Mylar bags, crushed them and smelt them. That's what you're looking at and that you're seeing. And it's really good. I'm glad this person asked this, because oxidation, dankiness could be mistaken. But if you learn like, okay, hey, this smells like this, and especially the hops that really showcase it, some people actually mistake it as someone actually has a bowl in the room, because of how to that dankness it smells like. If you get like a clear metallic smell, then yeah, that's a clear oxidation. You'll see that typically in darker beers or IPAs that have turned to color and have that'd be a classic clue of oxidation.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's all the questions we have. But before people jump off, there's a couple of things I want to make sure folks are aware of. One, the next in the 1881 virtual series, we're actually conducting our first ever virtual On the Rocks program. For those that are familiar here in Connecticut, we've done an 1881 On the Rocks version where we go to a local distillery that either owned or operated with UConn alums. We are actually bringing a mixologist and hospitality expert from the Boston area to do a virtual mixology class with us on December 8th. So you can find that information on our website. And you'll also get some follow-up information to sign up for that tomorrow in the follow-up email from this event. But the next in the What's on Tap, the 1881 series, What's on Tap series, I can't tell you how excited I am about this. I've been spewing about it to Chelsea and Alex over the last couple of weeks. But for those of you that are familiar with the Black is Beautiful beer initiative that has been ongoing throughout the country, that started from Weathered Souls Brewing out of San Antonio, Texas. You'll be happy to know that we are actually going to be partnering with the Weathered Souls Brewing co-founder and brewer Marcus Baskerville, who actually spearheaded the Black is Beautiful initiative to do the next of these What's on Tap series, along with 2 alumni-owned breweries that are actively participating in the Black is Beautiful series. To give you a little perspective, there are over 1,200 breweries now in 22 countries participating to raise awareness for injustice for people of color that they face daily, raise funds for local reform and legal defenses for those who've been wrong. And as I mentioned, joining that responsibility, we also have the University of Connecticut's School of Business Sattel Fellow in Corporate Social Responsibility and Associate Professor of Business Law, who will be moderating that discussion with us. And that will be entitled Beer for Good, Socially Conscious Efforts. So we're excited to announce that. That's going to be January 20th. That page is active. You can go ahead and sign up for that as well. Let me see here. There are a couple of questions that just popped in. Somebody's saying they're coming to visit you in Northfield. And I got an update for you there too, because Alex provided a coupon code for us for the prior days coming in today, but we are going to be sending you another one. And Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a 10% coupon on to-go and swag that they can purchase from you. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
So you'll be getting that coupon code from us tomorrow. It is good virtually up until the Christmas holiday. If you want to go ahead and show up in Northfield, test some stuff out and grab some to-go and some swag. Alex will be there, so you can try to hit him up with any additional questions you have. And there was one additional question that came through. What hops will provide specifically the Dank aroma? I guess we got a hop head in the crowd.
So like I was saying, the one that we use right now is cashmere. That's grown in New England. So that one really is showcasing the dankness. There's quite a few varieties grown in the Pacific Northwest. That one of their main traits is dankness. Some of the more preparatory varieties, and also too, it goes in how the brewer uses the hop. So like how I mentioned, when we open the bag, it carried through. There's some aspects, if you use it in the boil process, that dankness will deteriorate as you get to the final product. Also too is how much of the volume of hops that are being used in that particular beer. So the breweries that use like 7 pounds per barrel, you can get more of a dank aspect too from those particular varieties.
All right. And to clarify, the last thing that did come in, Northfield, Connecticut, right, Alex? That's where that's where you guys are sitting?
Northford.
Northford.
It's Northford.
I said Northfield. That's my fault. I said Northfield. Okay. Somebody clarified, and I'm glad they did. So Northford. I said it twice, I think. So thank you for clarifying on that one. And last, a huge thanks to Chelsea and Alex for joining us, for sharing your expertise in your various areas. This series is only as good as the alums that we can put on the screen, and you both have been a joy to work with. I know Erica and I on the back end, working with you and prepping up for this. You both have been a joy to do this, and we can't thank you both enough. And we hope that this helps your businesses as well, and I hope to have you both back for another program in the future. So both of you, thank you so much for sharing your time tonight. And for everybody out there, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We realize that you've been on Zoom meetings probably all day. Hopefully you got to enjoy a beer with us tonight and sitting there and enjoying that while we talk some beer and frankly weed and hemp and everything else. And so hopefully your families are all healthy and well during this time, and we wish you all the best, and we'll see you all next time. And Alex, Chelsea, thank you both again.
Yes, and
all right, everybody.
Toast. We definitely
toast. Yes, I've got water. You've got tea. Alex has got the beer, so we're all covered.
Infused tea. Yes.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Chelsea's cracking it open. All right, folks. Well, we'll talk to everybody soon. It was great having you all with us tonight, and thanks. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.